Hey everybody, welcome to the next episode of the Rail Technology Magazine podcast. Here today I want to talk to you about what Britain's railway is going through right now. It's the biggest structural change in a generation. You've got trains, timetables are being pulled under one roof. That's Great British Railways as we've learned to know it. But nationalising the railway also means nationalising its risk. So today, we're going to have a conversation around what cybersecurity looks like when one organisation is suddenly responsible for signalling, ticketing, stations, supply chains that used to sit within dozens of separate companies. My guest today spends his working life advising government and industry on exactly that. Chris, welcome to the podcast.
Thanks so much. Great to be here.
So, before we get into the conversation, Chris, the conversation that we're here to have, can you give the listeners a sense of your world, please? You know, between Fortinet, a visiting professorship, Tech UK, and advising the MOD and the Department for Energy Security and Net Zero, you're sat across government, academia, and industry all at once. So, what does that vantage point let you see that a single company security lead wouldn't?
That's a great question, Roy. I think I do it also for good reason. All of those things you mentioned actually all link into each other. So they are mutually supporting, if you like. There's a lot of commonality I can see from those different perspectives. And also as Fortinet being a lead vendor as my employer, we also take our own responsibility very seriously to make sure we are looking across and helping government and others to solve the very difficult problems of today. So personally, it's a very enjoyable position to be in, but also it's one that myself and I know Fortinet do take it very seriously.
Yeah, it's a huge opportunity. I can't do a podcast without talking about Great British Railways, and it really is the North Star for the industry, and there's some exciting times ahead. And for listeners that haven't followed this closely, what actually changes on day one of Great British Railways, and what does that structural shift matter for security specifically? Not just for timetabling and fares, but consolidation of infrastructure, operations under the public body, previously split across dozens of franchises and operators.
Yeah, I mean, it would be lovely, wouldn't it, if it was a big sort of single pole switch you could just throw and everything turns on. It's of course not like that. And like any merger or any organizational change, there needs a lot of prior preparation, but also there'll need to be a lot of careful leadership and culture change, which is something I'm sure we can talk about on this chat. But also, I think there are some upsides always of consolidating. We can see that, wouldn't we? It's a bit like if you're fusing anything, even in one's household, if you do that, you just by getting everything together, it makes things seemingly simpler because you've got consistency, perhaps a single security overview or a standard. But there's a downside as well, which we've of course seen in some big cyber incidents in the last few years, where if you have one sort of single point of failure, that can also be seen as a bigger target by those who wish ill of us. So there are some upsides and some downsides.
Yeah. So what would you say is the single biggest cybersecurity challenge GBR faces as it stands up?
Yeah, well, speaking to people in the sector and the industry, it's not the first thing is to give grace to the rail sector. It's an amazing sector, and I love working with the rail people that I'm privileged to work with, because what a tough job to do in this time of change, because we have a lot of legacy signaling and operational technology, or OT, estate out there. And that's not untypical when we think about healthcare estates and other things in different verticals. Those are things that we see as commonality elsewhere. And also a big challenge with IT and OT convergence. And what that means for people listening is when you've got systems to do with people's data, when you have to think about not just movement of trains and stock around, but also people's data themselves, people's ticketing data. And then you've got that estate plus the, like we mentioned, signaling and control systems. To have that merging as well as an estate does bring some challenges as well, because you don't want someone who gets in on one system being able to go across, if you like, east-west, we call it, across to another one. So that brings some challenges. And I think another couple of points I'd say is in terms of big challenges facing rail and GBR as it comes into being now is the supply chain. And that's not something that's unusual in the critical national infrastructure type of state, because the supply chain is that level below the obvious areas that need protecting. And of course, if the supply chain ends up creaking and groaning under an attack or incident, then that can have impact, of course, on the rail network and the passengers themselves. And lastly, perhaps it's the workforce and skills, which is the same across the whole country. And I see that from my roles. How do we upskill people and get the culture change and everyone thinking about cybersecurity as part of their day job?
Yeah, and culture and skills are embedded in every single industry. We're across three sectors as an organisation: public sector, healthcare, and the transport sector, specifically rail. And there's a few things you've mentioned there that are a common theme between all the industries that we serve. It's a big jigsaw. There's a lot of pieces. There's a lot of moving parts. And practically, then, does becoming one organisation make those problems easier or harder to fix? You get one security standard to aim for, but you also inherit everyone else's technical debt at once. How do you manage that?
Yeah, it is challenging, isn't it? And I think in the rail sector, we're very aware of the major changes that happened following the Clapham train disaster. For example, lots of health and safety and rail maintenance standards improved. And historically, over the sort of, let's call it, traditional engineering sectors, and when we really look at it, digital software engineering is still effectively a scientific and engineering discipline. It's only been going for 25 years. So we have to be realistic that we don't have an area of standards there yet, because things are naturally growing and becoming in reality now, and the governments are helping with that as well. At the moment, there's a lot going on. I'm involved with a lot of that at the moment. So you can have one standard, but then who's writing that standard, and is it an international standard? Because the train manufacturers don't want to be making a train to one standard in the UK and another standard in Germany, for example, or Japan. So we are lacking that international coherence on that level, and then there's a level below in terms of the UK. And I think we're now in what I'm calling the compliance era, because that means there's actually, it shouldn't be seen as a negative thing. It should be seen as something getting us all in order, and it'll actually mean that passengers are safer, trains are safer going forward, because we have one common standard. But that is work in progress. That is not something that we have unity. There's a lot of standards out there, and we have not got that unity of effort yet.
Yeah, and the pace of change is just colossal right now. The way AI has come in and just swept the board. You're saying it's only 25 years old. You're constantly working on standards. Do we ever find ourselves in a situation where we think we've come up with a standard, it's going to be good and stand the test of time, and by the time we've implemented that standard, it's obsolete already because of the pace of change around us?
Yeah, that's a really good point. I think the key and core skill there is to have a standard that does not disrupt the amazing progress, which is very exciting, of technology, where we're talking 6-month generational technology cycles, which is incredible. So companies like Fortinet, we know we're producing and selling products which just didn't exist a couple of years ago, and certainly even a year ago some of the things were very different. So that's to make sure we're matching the threat, but also it's just really good use of AI for positive. It's not, AI is always seen as a negative in a lot of the media coverage, but actually when we look at how it's improving, it will do all of our own lives, but it also does make our cybersecurity safer, because it allows us to be able to operate at a faster pace, and that's what AI does, of course, increase scale and pace. And I think we should always be aware, with those standards coming in, if the standard just accepts the fact that there will be this rate of change, this tempo going on all the time, the standard should be something that evolves. And if we think about the sectors like the IMO does for the maritime world, the shipping, they adapt their standards, sometimes annually, isn't it? But where to go to look and find out where that standard is, and everyone's in the same lane. So that's the sort of level we need to get to that in the digital and cyberspace soon.
So Fortinet must be quite a mighty machine then, because you constantly, creating, evolving and adapting and delivering these standards. But you also mentioned before that you've created quite the suite of products over the last few years, which I imagine is to meet with customers' demand, new market opportunities. Your research and development facility must be quite an organ within your business, and a really important part of it as well, I imagine, and to your customers too.
Absolutely, and I think that's the thing to remind everyone, that the cybersecurity world is a very high-tech one, and it attracts the best talent in the world. and the R&D, there's literally billions being spent globally, and certainly by Fortinet, a lot of money to make sure that we stay ahead. And aspects such as our recent threat landscape report, and I sometimes think, Roy, there's some amazing reports out there, and I force myself to make sure I have time to read our reports and also other peer reports around, because there's some great content and that allows you to catch up. And if we think about our profession, we're so busy, and the rail sector, cyber world will be even busier, of course, with we just talked about that sort of convergence into GBR now, that to use these reports. And the threat landscape report, I would certainly highlight, it's a good one. And that showed about the industrialization, largely because of AI and the high compute speed being used by bad actors, industrialization of cybercrime, which is amazing. And to hit, in beforehand, it was easier to hit people and businesses and retail and something where there was a credit card and something you can get at. But of course, with the online digital ticketing and to passenger data, people like rail companies and GBR will of course be a natural target. But then, like we've seen every day, they're very well protected and secured as well. So it is a constant fight going on there for good. And that's why it's a good sector to be in, because you are fighting for good every day. But those reports do highlight the level and scale of uplift. And I think Fortinet's report put it very well, where we're talking about a continuous threat environment, CTE. So there's before, it's sort of something bad's going to happen one day. Now it's happening every day. And the automated response that we would put into it just means that nothing gets through. So it is a bit of a revelation to most people. And I always assure people, don't get too worried about it, because there's an awful lot of great work going on behind the scenes every day to make sure people are safe.
So go into that, and then all these reports, all this information you're consuming, you personally as an organization, and as an organization that you're putting out there to the sector. What trends are you watching right now that you feel will shape cybersecurity quite significantly over the next few years?
Yeah, I think, and specific to the rail sector, because the critical national infrastructure, which rail is very much part of course, it's high profile, and we've seen even political levels, transport as a big interest, because it's something that the public uses most days. So therefore, that becomes an interesting thing to state actors wanting to disrupt good countries. So that means that there's a level of cybersecurity needed there against state and not just criminals, state interest in disruption. So that's always going to be present there. That's a trend which is concerning, but it's not something I'm too concerned about, because as long as you have the right cybersecurity in place and the right protocols and things are kept up to date with good hygiene, that's fine. And I think the other trend is the convergence of IT and OT accelerating. And I think there was some good stats in our OT security report. It was about the fact that the visibility being not such a good part, because visibility was down for people better see. Only 24% of people, of organizations rather, could see half of their estate. So that's pretty poor. So a quarter of those answering a survey said that they could only see half of their estate. So there's a lot of work to be done there on visibility, so you can see what you're protecting and securing. That's because things are so complex. But the other aspect is the fact that the number of attacks on whereas convergence attacks, IT and OT, has actually dropped quite a lot, because that means what's called segmentation. So think about just putting blocks in place and making areas isolated, rather than having someone, if they get in, be able to have free play inside an organization. There's, if you like, internal locks and files and doors that they have to get through. So segmentation is a good way. That shows that there's a huge uptick. There's a positive thing from the OT security report. So there's some good, some not so good we've got to work on. Those are some of the trends. And we've mentioned supply chain. That's always out there, but that's something that I'm sure will improve with government legislation coming in about that as well.
And can I just clarify then, this OT report, this is a Fortinet report?
Yes, that's right. Yeah, so OT security report. We push out really good reports annually, and we do one on OT security report, one on the threat landscape report, so the bad stuff, what's coming at us, and we also do a skills gap report, which is really interesting as well. That highlights some of those other aspects and what the human factors needed to do, and where are we going in the trends in that. But I think overall, the landscape that we try and support, so this is Fortinet not doing our day job, we're actually doing our altruism of pushing out these reports using our visibility globally. And I think that can help the sector a lot. I think industry need to lean in and help GBR now in this important phase, and GBR need to welcome that. We need to work closer together, all of us, to make sure we can keep everybody safe on the rail.
And I guess people can find all of these reports on your website.
Absolutely, yeah, they're all publicly available, which I think is another good thing. There's no pay and read attitude there. It's
Yeah, yeah.
something Fortinet's a very transparent attitude with that, and we're the most transparent in the industry, I believe. So those things I'd certainly say to people, if you want to know more about these things, just grab a cup of tea and read those.
Yeah, well, we'll put the link in the episode notes so people can access that, because I think the readers,
Great.
having listened to some of the things, sorry, not the readers, the listeners, having listened to some of the things that you've talked about so far, I think they'll want to access those reports, grab a coffee, cup of tea, like you say, and just think about their business and some of the
Yeah,
challenges that
absolutely.
they may not have even thought of, that the reports will elicit for them.
Yeah, and there's one thing actually which is quite specific to rail and other more traditionally heavy engineering sectors, where engineers, this is not a criticism, it's a cultural fact, don't like people getting into their lane and moving in and interfering with engineering. And I think quite rightly so. Engineering is
Yeah,
a incredibly highly talented and educated profession. So
yeah,
what's happened is that a lot of those systems before have been therefore kept under control of the engineers. Whereas traditionally, of course, now we've grown in the cyber sector, it's the CISO, so the person who's the information security officer for the
yeah.
organization, controls the security. And there's been a bit of a fight, not necessarily a nasty fight, but a bit of politics about who's going to control that. And the good news is the trend is up for organizations saying, look, all of this stuff is really important now. It all needs to come under one person.
Yeah.
And that's a good trend. So that's something we've identified in our OT security report, that 60% of people currently intend to group it under CISO, with an aspiration of 81% saying they're going to put it all under the CISO. These are huge upticks. So this is good progress in the sector. And for those engineers out there listening to this, or thinking about it as well, don't fear it. I think it's something that
Yeah.
means that the CISO expertise will work hand in glove with you to keep your systems safe. So this is a positive move.
Yeah, I really think in all sectors, from the conversations I have with people, technology has been a great enabler of collaboration between departments. It's brought departments together, and it's helped them achieve much greater things as they would than they would have done, if they did continue to work in silos. And I
Yeah.
think, giving people that one central point of responsibility to lead the innovation forward, and to bring different stakeholders along for the journey, and getting them together with roundtables, looking at what the challenge statements are for the engineers, for the operators, and things like that, and then coming up with solutions as a group of people, rather than here's what the OT people think you should do, and this is the reason why, and the engineers go, well, you've not considered this, you've not considered that, and you've not considered the other, and you get that jarring. And I think that's really disappearing at pace now, from the conversations I'm having with people. What do you think?
Yeah, it's interesting because there's the engineers and the operators, of course, need to. It's a two-way conversation with those imposing. Let's not get away from it. Cybersecurity measures, one of the big problems we have with operational technology, especially with critical national infrastructure, is with a 24-hour railway, which we now run. We never used to, and we now run a very, very good, very efficient. Lots of freight at night, lots of great things going on in the rail sector in the UK. That need for continuous coverage and, of course, continuous security means turning off systems, monitoring systems, signaling, track systems is quite difficult. And as we all know, no one wants to have your laptop suddenly tell you it's going to update and you go, oh, no, please, not now. But you can't do that in OT. You can't have something where it suddenly just updates and all the trains have to stop or something, middle of the night or daytime.
Yeah.
So there's some big challenges with operational technology. So there's a two-way flow to make sure the practical application of cybersecurity allows the system still to work. And that's a particular skill in operational technology and in critical national infrastructure. But that's a good thing where rail can learn from other sectors, because that's just as common in aircraft and other transport modes, as well as other elements of critical national infrastructure like water. Power has to be on all the time.
Yeah, absolutely. And you're making a really important point there about freight. And I think freight is something that gets not forgotten about in rail, but they're vying for more all of the time. Freight can do more as a sector, and I think the natural assumption with any industry is we'll do things overnight because it's going to be less disruptive. But for the freight sector, that will be hugely disruptive for them. So it needs that kind of bird's eye view thinking to ensure that, yes, we don't have to stop the railway and reboot it, because that means goods and services that we rely on every single day aren't going to get around the country.
Absolutely, and I think there's always times, and the engineers and the operators, the experts, of course, on this. There's times when it's optimal to do these things because normal maintenance has to happen. Signaling needs to be rebooted and updated itself for its own operating system. So this is not something that's particularly new, but it's the fact that both parties have to listen to each other, and there needs to be a pragmatic and safe solution for the railways with cybersecurity.
Yeah, 100%. So talk to us a little bit then about the regulated era. What does operating under tighter regulation actually mean day to day for a body like GBR versus how the old franchise operators were held to account?
Yeah, well, we talked, Roy, about the fact it's a new sector and things are only pretty new, and the need for some tightening of regulations and controls. Because at the moment, if you have a situation where it's effectively free play, it's not like that now, but it could be quite dangerous, of course. So to have more regulation in not only critical national infrastructure, such as rail, but also in ordinary daily life for the public, some regulation there to make sure behaviours, standards. But one of the key things is accountability. So who is accountable to the regulators? Now, we're used to that in terms of rail regulation and the train companies, and a lot of regulation effort being put into things like efficiency of railways, timings and such like, safety. But now the accountability on cyber, rather than being, we often say Dave or Jane in IT, their problem, and in the industry, in the cybersecurity industry, we know it's everybody's problem. So this is quite a big sort of tipping point, really, where the accountability is very firmly going to be placed at the leadership, and therefore guided by the National Cybersecurity Centre, who are outstanding. And again, another great top tip: if anyone has half an hour, just grab a cup of tea and thumb through their website. It's a mine of great information, and they do a lot of support in the UK to the critical national infrastructure such as rail. So there's that aspect about single accountability, but also there will be fines, and fining is often, people think nothing of it, but when you're a large organization and the threat of fines, that's something that normally makes senior executives sit up and take notice, which means that board level are much happier to resource things such as cybersecurity. It's often been difficult to get cybersecurity resources when you've not had an attack, because people perhaps think, do we really need this? Nothing's happened, which of course is a bit of a false front there, false confidence. So now when the fact is, well, you better have something in place and good, because you're going to get fined heavily, and there's reputational risk as well for the organization, and perhaps quite rightly the individuals as well. So professionalization through this single point of accountability and is an important thing.
I mean, I just come into my head then, I liken it to insurance. I mean, to drive a car, you're legally bound to have insurance for a variety of different reasons. Do you ever think we'll get to a point where cybersecurity will be a legal requirement? It will be seen as an insurance policy that you have to have if you're operating in a critical safety business, or your handling of people's data, personal data?
Yeah, it's really important. It's sort of the missing part, isn't it? Because the need to have insurance, that people will accept cyber risk insurance in the insurance sector. So that's one big evolution going on at the moment. If we think of the Strait of Hormuz and the political challenges there, with the conflict between the US and Iran at the moment, the reason why those ships are not going through the Strait of Hormuz is not to do with anything other than the insurance companies saying it's not happening. So therefore, there's a big risk. So think about that. The ecosystem that's missing is the fact that normally, in your car analogy was brilliant, and I use it a lot, that you go and get your car done with the MOT, which is a garage with a standard approved and inspected, perhaps annually or spot checked. And then once you've got that tick, you can then go and get your car insured. And you can't really get it unless you've got a car that's decent, because why should the insurance company insure a right wreck and a banger? And then once you've got the insurance in place, you can drive on the road and operate. So if you think of that ecosystem, the government, the councils are not every day spending time and effort on that. That is a closed ecosystem of compliance, which is beautiful, and it keeps us all safe on the roads. The missing part at the moment for that in a lot of our sectors is the insurance part, because that's actually driving a lot of the requirements. You have to have insurance to be on the road under a law, and therefore you're in breach of the law. So you can't, for example, if it was railways, you can't operate without a license. We know you have to do that now, safety licenses. So there's definitely something coming, which will mean that the government will have to spend less time on it, and the system will become like the cars, a closed system. That'll happen soon.
how long? How far away are
Yeah,
we from that? Five, ten?
it's another 5 podcasts I think I want to talk about the insurance sector and their challenges with the insurance sector. Why would they want to? They got to insure something. If it's you and I, it was our money and our
Yeah,
customer, our shareholders' money to pay out on claims when you're not quite sure whether that was or wasn't a cyber attack. It's
yeah,
that blurred opinion piece is still very difficult. And at the moment, the threat and risk rising and everything else,
yeah.
it's certainly something that's a big challenge for the. And I feel every bone in my body feels the insurance sector having to grapple with this at the moment. But it's done it before. It's done it in railways. It's done it in oil and gas
Yeah,
and other high
yeah,
risk engineering sectors.
yeah.
It's happened, so it'll get there.
Yeah, they're probably just waiting for the political will to be just right for them to be able to then productize something
Yeah, that's
and
right.
roll it out that's of value and doesn't feel like it's a tax, a stealth tax, something that provides real safety, security, and rigor around what they're doing.
Yeah.
Other industries then, we talked about insurance a little bit there. You work across government, defence and energy as well as rail. What's an approach or lesson from another critical infrastructure sector, whether it be energy, aviation, water, that railway should be borrowing right now?
Yeah, there's a lot of good practice, and I always think when the more complex things become, then it really is important to look over the fence and see what's happening in other
Yeah,
parallel sectors. And that's something not through a lack of intelligence or will on the people in the rail sector. They want to do this. It's having time. So there's definitely a role for media. There's definitely a role also for trade bodies to encourage this debate at the moment, and Fortinet has been taking part with some of those. Energy sector, I think, has certainly got some very good examples on IT, OT, convergence and
yeah,
security, tightened regulations, how to operate in a regulated environment. So some beautiful examples there. I think culture-wise, aviation I would single out as a culture where near miss and instant reporting is shared laterally as a standard.
mm,
There's a lovely saying in the flying world that there are no new air accidents, only new pilots. Isn't
right,
that so? It's
okay,
really clever, isn't it? So
yeah,
in other words,
yeah,
it's
yeah,
probably true, aircraft stalling
yeah,
on landing and so on. So, but it's just they always look at it as a profession. So we need to get used to. I'm afraid it'll be culturally, it'll be sort of Friday 1 o'clock, is your hour where you thumb through the incident reports, look at the trade body or NCSC are very good for these, or the vendors. Fortinet put out a lot of good information on our FortiGuard Labs website, which has these incidents so people can look at it. But a
yeah,
lot of them don't make a lot of sense to what I call the laity, the ordinary engineer out there who's doing his job. He's not a cyber expert, so why he doesn't understand some of this stuff. So there's
yeah.
definitely a responsibility on all of us to make sure these things are more easily digestible, understood, and recommendations what you need to do. So aviation's a good example, and I think another one mentioned supply chain. Defence has got an enormous, complex UK and international supply chain, and
Yeah,
they're doing a lot to make sure there's standards requiring cyber essentials, which is an NCSC backed standard of all their suppliers. So a minimum baseline standard is in there. Those sort of assurance models are very useful to look at. So you're absolutely right. It's definitely good practices to be seen elsewhere.
and if GBR adopted just one of these practices in the first year, which do you think would move the needle the most?
Um, Ironically, I think a lot of them are in train at the moment, and I think supply chain would be the one I would go for because it's such a big problem, but
Yeah,
also probably the problem that could be a bit of a painful one to suffer if your supply chain gets taken out. And when you have to think of some of the devolved responsibilities into the supply chain in the rail sector,
yeah,
that if it suddenly stops, then that's a major issue. So I think supply chain, because there's so much, I would say start that one now, but definitely collaborate and look at how it's been worked through with other sectors and what's available already. So
yeah,
national standards are being put in place, cyber essentials, the cyber assessment framework, another excellent piece of work by NCSC, and that is basically a self-assessment check sheet. So you can go through and have a common standard, perhaps call it a self-MOT, so you can
yeah,
check
yeah,
out where you lie and go, oh, we're a bit ropey on these parts, so we need to invest some resources into there. So it does give a common standard by
yeah.
world-class organisation, by NCSC. So I think that supply chain and insisting that they have a standard such as Cyber Essentials or demonstrate an assessment under the Cyber Assessment Framework, that would be a great start.
Yeah, I agree with you. It makes perfect sense because if you take Network Rail as is today, I think it's got a supply chain of around 7,000 companies working in partnership with it in any one time. You got HS2. something similar. Then you've got the operators, they've got their own supply chains, but you've got the tier ones, then you've got your subcontractors underneath that. So
Absolutely.
we're talking of an
Absolutely.
ecosystem of, hundreds, if not millions of people working, having a different role and responsibility that is feeding into running the railway. So yeah,
Absolutely. Yeah.
I agree,
Yeah.
probably. It's the biggest risk, but also the biggest opportunity. One thing I wanted to touch on was Fortinet recently brought together MPs, the NCSC, and train operating companies for a round table on what we've just been talking about. What came out of that conversation?
Yeah, I think it was really useful that we did that because we felt there was just a need to gently bump start some conversations from strategic level down to operator level, and just so everyone understands the risks and
Yeah,
how can we start to solve these problems. It's something I've always enjoyed doing, getting people together and highlighting perhaps 3 or 4 outputs that we can all work on. There's no point producing 25 outputs; it's too many. So the lower numbers of really good crunchy things, and we did deduce that certainly one thing was, we've touched on it, a national incident reporting system that would be
yeah,
useful and beneficial. Think about near miss incident reports in the aviation, something like that for cyber, which could be very digestible for the rail and perhaps the transport sector, might be better looped together, and perhaps under
yeah,
Department for Transport. We also felt that procurement, to embed secure by design practices. Secure by design is a set of words familiar to the cybersecurity industry, but elsewhere, when you think about major train manufacturers have been designing trains 10, 15 years ago that are coming
yeah,
into service now.
yeah.
Well,
I know.
they were designed in status quo, which was not what it is today. So to have the embedded cybersecurity requirements, cybersecurity at every level of design and procurement is a big recommendation. We talked about skills and the challenge there.
Yeah,
The skills gap report for Fortinet, again, I referenced that. People will find a wonderful bit of information in there, and it's a really enjoyable report to read. But that
yeah,
last one also is we recommended sharing, collaboration, especially across the critical national infrastructure estate, because
yeah.
it's quite obvious to Fortinet, because we serve a lot of different verticals, that all the concerns and challenges were very similar to one that's going on elsewhere. So we're better off at national level sharing some of that data across. Yeah.
You make a really interesting point there about trains that were commissioned 10, 15 years ago coming into service now. Um, does that mean we're finding ourselves in a situation where we're having to retrofit cybersecurity on something that's not finished being manufactured yet before it can go into service? And how are we managing that?
Yeah, it's a really good point. Its first point is to reassure everyone that everything's safe, and
Yeah, yeah,
retrofitting is a standard thing. When you think about aircraft carriers, defense systems, nuclear power stations, these are long lead items like
mm,
trains, which are very complex machines.
yeah,
So the ability to enhance and put in cybersecurity at various levels. The good news is a lot of it can be put in at software level.
yeah,
So a lot of it doesn't have to be something with devices being put on. Now, it doesn't matter so much actually with a train. Interesting enough, with an aircraft and things, you've got to think about central gravity for the aircraft if you start bolting on boxes around the place.
yeah,
But and shipping the same, it's less of a problem, but it's still a concern. So the industry is quite used to retrofitting. It's
hmm,
just not the way it should be. It's not good practice. And what we'd rather see is design engineers saying, okay, at every stage, right, we think this is a really good enhancement. It could be a new sensor assisted automatic speed safety braking system, something like that,
yeah,
which is going to really enhance safety to prevent challenges and tragedies in the future. And then someone wants to be able to say at every stage, okay, who could interfere with this? Who could interfere with it in the future? And how can we make sure we speak to the cybersecurity industry right now to say,
yeah,
what can we embed in the design? And honestly, often it's just a software issue to input some software onto things, but also the ability to make sure you can protect what we call the firewalls, the protection of the organization, the walls around the building, if you like.
yeah,
Those are, again, able to be done as a product, a physical product, something that cables go in and out of, but also software. So a lot of these things can be done retrofit
yeah.
well, but we'd rather it was being done right back at design stage. And we've got to give grace. It wasn't around 20 years ago, as we say, 15 years ago, in the same vein.
Yeah. And I think that highlights Fortinet's, approach secure by design, which is key there. And how do you ensure that fits into an environment like rail with legacy signaling alongside brand new digital systems?
Yeah, because the secure by design philosophy isn't just something about some drawings early on in the design process. It's actually a culture. So it should be iterative. So it should be when there is an update, an upgrade to something, that also needs to be looked at. If we think about construction sector, if we're doing an upgrade to a building or an extension, we don't just throw something on top of a garage or something and say, I hope that stands. There's a whole new assessment that has to be done. And in the same way in cybersecurity, we would encourage that secure by design is a process of inspection, because there's a moving threat landscape out there every day. We talked about the continuous threat environment, so that needs to be adjusted. Now, the good news is that doesn't mean that all engineers in mech eng and civ eng in the rail sector need to be suddenly to be cyber experts. They need to just talk to people who are experts and say, we're trying to do this. Are there any challenges you can see there? What sort of product should we look at just embedding and having in there? Because once that product's in, a bit like I always say to people, think about like your mobile phone, it can update and can be relicensed. That's often, of course, one of the problems we see in the sector, that there's a lot of media coverage out there when basically people don't update and upgrade. And then they tend to make a lot of noises about it's the same as not putting oil in your car for ages and then blaming the car manufacturer. Well, there's got to be a big element of self-care and cyber hygiene, as we call it, updating things, keeping things patched. But we have mentioned the challenges of doing that in operational technology are high, because you can't turn everything off every few minutes. So there's some challenges there, but people can work through those. There can be automated patching and different timings can be done. So there's some good interface. And the big thing is to talk and collaborate with the cyber people at every level.
Yeah. And I think that's where long-term partnerships come into play. It's not a one and done. And for an organization the size and complexity of GBR, what does a genuine long-term security partnership look like, as opposed to a one-off vendor contract?
Yeah, absolutely. It's something that we aspire to, and we're very proud of the fact we have long-term relationships with people, because people are good at working with people, and we think it's really important to listen and hear the challenges and work closely together. That often, in my experience, is normally a natural thing, as long as that first stage is taken. A lot of people are reticent and they think they don't want to embarrass themselves or get into a difficult conversation. That doesn't matter. Ours is a very complicated estate and world in cybersecurity, and we completely respect other people's estates and worlds are very complex too. So it's that fusion together by good collaboration and good speaking. That's the one thing I think that builds those long-term partnerships. And I really think the human factors of being high integrity, trust, having very good technology, these are the things that I know that we work on day to day, every day, to make sure we have optimized all of those things, so we can keep data, devices and people safe everywhere.
And last question before we wrap up, you've got 30 seconds with a team leading cybersecurity for Great British Railways. What's the one piece of advice you'd give them?
Yeah, it's a great question to finish on. I think it's as simple as this, actually. I think it's about you collaborate to accelerate. And if you get the philosophy which NCSC and the government have been promoting of defending as one, think of it as a sectoral problem. It's not an individual problem. Share, discuss, talk, look over the fences at what's going on in other C&I verticals, ask people who serve those verticals, what best practice could we take from other sectors here to get us ahead faster. So that collaboration level is what I'd say. And if we have those bodies in place early, not very soon, before GBR fully comes into play and life, but also at government level as well, and trade bodies. So all those collaborative entities need to get together and start talking. It's good to talk.
Absolutely. Bob Hoskins coined the phrase, and it's a good one ever since.
Yeah.
Chris, that's been great. I've really enjoyed the conversation. I've learned a hell of a lot, and I know our watchers, listeners will have learned a lot about that too. So great. Thanks for your time. Speak soon.
Thank you. Thanks so much.